Hello, everyone. It's nice to speak with you again today. Um, Today, my topic is the problem of evil. What do we teach our children? Let me start off by saying this is probably the hardest presentation I've ever had to put together. Evil is a tough subject, to say the least, but I'm going to give it my best shot here. I want to start with a definition. I pulled this out of, I believe it was the Merriam-Webster dictionary. The fact of suffering, misfortune, and wrongdoing, or a cosmic evil force, to something that brings sorrow, distress, or calamity. I pretty much agree with this, except for maybe the cosmic evil force part. I'll try to get into that a little and hopefully unpack that a little bit. So I want to start out with the question, does evil exist? When you look at events in the world, events like September 11th, 2001, for example, it's kind of hard to argue that evil doesn't exist. Certainly, that was an act of evil. I don't think anyone would disagree. And then there are other things in history, too, just to name one. Here's a picture from Auschwitz. The Holocaust certainly was just one of those awful events of history that seems to reveal evilness. But, of course, these things were brought about by man, and you wonder, how do these things happen? And I think when people are brought to a point where they dehumanize each other, where you stop seeing others as human, that's how things like this can happen. It begins in the mind of men, in the minds of men, that allow this kind of awfulness. And it's sad, really, but in a sense, it seems like evil is tied to man in a lot of ways. I think that's true. And to sort of make this point, I want to bring the point, in nature, do you really ever see evil? And to do that, I'm going to bring up an interesting stat. So the number of people killed by rattlesnakes per year in the U.S., I looked this up, it's apparently 5.5. And I thought picking a snake, the United States is a Judeo-Christian state, tends to be the symbol, at least in Christian thinking, and I guess Judaism as well. But whenever you bite someone, or I think of it as evil, probably not that territory, not a word by that, but simply it is evil. In that sense, it's just a rattlesnake being a rattlesnake. It's just the way nature works sometimes. But when we get into religious philosophy and the problem of evil, it can be a real sticky point for people, especially if they believe in a personal God, because you could start out with an idea of God. God is an all-powerful, all-knowing, perfect being, regardless of which God or a person identifies with. That seems to be a good working definition. But then, therefore, it follows, God must not want there to be evil. Since he's all-knowing, he knows evil exists, just like we know it exists. God is all-powerful, so he must possess the power to end evil. So why do we see evil in the world? That's a tough idea, and I think it was probably best stated by the Roman poet Lucretius with this basically 4 statements that go something like this. Is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he's not omnipotent, he's not all-powerful. Is God able to prevent evil but not willing? He's not good. Is God both able and willing to prevent evil? Well, if that's true, then why do we see evil? Why do we see manifestations of evil, seemingly? And is he neither able or willing to prevent evil? Well, then why call him God? Or maybe why believe in him? So it is a tough idea that's brought up, referred to philosophically as the problem of evil. And the response you get from most people on this is what I would call the free will clause. God gave man free will, so evil is a result of man's actions. And, to some extent you could say, okay, I understand what they're trying to say there. But there's 2 problems with it for me. Since God created man, why did he give him this rather diabolical power? Why couldn't he have created us better, I guess, if he's all-powerful? Or, and the idea of a cosmic evil force, if people who believe in God might also believe in the devil, it's like, well, why did God create the devil? Things might have been better without that, if you believe that way. And then, of course, the other problem with it is there's lots of suffering that's not caused by man. Volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, tsunamis, various diseases. What about lot about that. And but in general, the idea of free will, I think, is sort of a red herring, because the idea of free will has really come into question, especially over the last 30 years. In a way, there's little room in physics, in the laws of physics, for free will. Part of that is, the one thing about the current state of physics is the past and the present and the future seem to be on equal footing. And to me, that raises some interesting questions about free will. Given the vastness of the universe, if say there's 10 billion light years away from us, there's a planet, and there's an alien sitting on that planet, sitting in a room, and he's sharing our now slice, us in this meeting, having this discussion, and he gets up and starts to move away from us. An interesting thing happens when you introduce motion into this idea of the vastness of the universe, and that is that his now slice, his angle on our now, changes into our past. And if he turns around and moves toward us, his angle to our present changes to the future. And so, in some sense, you could say that the past has already happened. We could get it back. The past could be gotten back, depending on where and when you are. And the future's already happened. And that's sort of a strange idea. But yet, through investigation, it seems right. It's been tested as being fairly right. And then, of course, there's neuroscience, the famous Libet experiment from the 80s, which raises questions about free will. The idea that people reporting conscious choice, there seems to be a ramp up in the brain that happens, I guess, in recent experiments as much as 10 seconds before the conscious report by the person that they've made a decision. So, interesting idea. The point I just wanted to make is that, free will doesn't necessarily get us out of this. I mean, whether or not there's free will, who knows, but I don't think it gets us out of the problem of evil. I think there's a little more to it than that, and hopefully I can now come and try to explain the Tao perspective on evil. So I think there's a good hint in chapter 2 of the Tao Te Ching, and that's this quote: "When the world knows beauty as beauty, ugliness arises. When it knows good as good, evil arises." And I think this is an interesting point. It's really, when you think of good and evil, really, they're descriptions, human descriptions that we put on what we observe. So evil's a loaded word, so you have to be careful when we're using it. In nature, nothing is purely good or purely evil. Rather, what we see is there are many things in life that are a mixture of the two. Something may happen that may turn out to be good for one person, but not so good for another person. Those are just sort of sometimes the natural way things evolve. So Tao cultivators realize that no extreme can be maintained indefinitely. If there's an evil state of affairs, the Tao will work to bring balance with goodness naturally arising. Of course, the inverse can be true too. But the best defense against evil is to realize that it can never completely destroy love and goodness. It just doesn't have that power. When perceiving evil in human beings, it's helpful to remember that even evildoers have a true self. Everyone has a Buddha nature. And that really is the key, because evil is born, in a sense, in the hearts and minds of men. Violence and greed, these negative emotions, can bring about the actions of evil. And that's what we have to guard against. The best way to prevent it, of course, is to not see others as unhuman, but to realize that everyone has goodness in them. That's the thing to focus on. If you don't do that, then evil just perpetuates. So I think that's the important lesson. Compassion toward the perceived evildoers is something worth considering. It's counterintuitive. I mean, we want to sort of react and strike out against the evildoers. I mean, you think of child molesters and murderers. But really, it's better to have compassion, understanding, realizing that everyone has a true self. Not that we don't have to protect society from that in some way, but we can't let it allow us to hate other people or think of other people as something less than human. All right, so I'm going to try to sum it up here a bit now. The concept of evil is hard to deny. You look in the world at the events. It's hard not to read a news story today and not come away discouraged because evil appears to persist. It's helpful to avoid thinking of evil as a cosmic force, I think. Realize that evil can never completely destroy love and goodness. It's good to remind ourselves of that. Negative emotions like greed and violence are born in the human mind. So in some ways we have to work to control our thoughts, to not allow these things to take root, to recognize when they're arising, and to do our best to stop them, stop that way of thinking, and replace it with something better, something more compassionate. Taking control over our thoughts is an important step toward avoiding evil. Remember that perpetrators of evil have a true self, too, and are in need of compassion. That's very true. Everyone has a Buddha nature. And we should do our best to recognize that we're all connected, and that hating someone else, in a sense, is hating yourself, when you think of it that way. So take hope in the reality that the Tao over time will bring balance to any situation. I truly believe that is true. And so I just want to end with this last quote here, because as I said in the beginning, the title of the presentation was The Problem of Evil. What do we teach our children? And I hope I didn't bash religion too much. I wasn't trying to, but to be fair, I'm going to end with a quote from a marvelous Christian named N.D. Wilson, and this is from his book, Notes from the Tilta World. The world is rated R, and no one is checking IDs. Do not try to make it G by imagining the shadows away. Do not try to hide your children from the world forever. But do not try to pretend there is no danger. Train them, give them sharp eyes and bellies full of laughter. Make them dangerous, make them yeast, and when they've grown, they will pollute the shadows. Okay, so there it was, the problem of evil. What do we teach our children? Thank you so much for giving me a chance to speak with you this morning. I hope I said something that was of use, and I hope you all have a wonderful Sunday.
Thank you, Alex. Alex, could you bring your summary slide up again?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Those of you who were present last time, you may recall the challenge that I had for you was to ask you to think about the teaching on moderation from a Tao perspective, that it's important to be moderate on everything. And then my challenge to you was, well, what if someone says we should hate hatred? We should be extreme in eradicating, destroying, eliminating evil. Why should we not hate evil in the extreme? So that was my question, that was my challenge. I am very happy to see that actually Alex is thinking along the same lines, asking the same questions, providing some of his own answers, which I hope that you will do for yourselves as well. Think about the answers for yourself. And I also have an answer from Bob Nixon from last time, and he encapsulates and summarizes what Alex is expressing nicely as well. And Bob said, without evil, we would not know goodness. So if you think about that, that's actually very similar to the Tao Te Ching quote that Alex provided. So I'd like to draw everyone's attention, before we take a break, just your quick moment of your attention on the next to last line there on Alex's slide, where it says, remember the perpetrators of evil have a true self too and are in need of compassion. So everyone is in need of compassion. If you prefer, use the word spirit or soul in place of true self. Whatever helps make that sentence sensible for you, that's kind of the direction that I want to go into. I mentioned last time that hatred is a poison. Hatred is toxic. It's not poisonous to the subject of your hatred, the person that you hate. It is toxic to yourself. So whatever I can do to help people reduce the poison in them when they hate something else or someone else, that's what I hope to be getting into later on today.